Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the land from which I'm joining today, from University of British Columbia, which is located on traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. We are very grateful for the opportunity to live, work, and learn on these lands. And also, I would like to acknowledge all the lands that our Sarawak Walks takes place. Today's webinar will focus on, as you can see, the topic is from data to impact. So basically, on data dissemination. We are joined by the presenters today are Dr. Elizabeth Saewayc and Sushmita Roy, who we call her Sushi. Um, Most of us know Elizabeth. She is the executive director of SARAVYC, also director of School of Nursing, a professor, a distinguished university scholar, and decades of work to improve health equity and well-being for young people, especially those who are marginalized, from marginalized group. Sushi is our research assistant here at SARAVYC, who focuses on communications and knowledge mobilization for all the work. So she supports with all the knowledge dissemination work here at SARAVYC. She is completely doing her MA in Media and Technology Studies education at UBC with an undergrad degree from NYU. And her work in US, she brings several years of experience in communications and marketing and social impact setting. Her work is at the intersection of research, storytelling, and strategy, helping ensure findings don't just land in journals, but also show up as clear, accessible resources people can actually use, from toolkits and infographics to newsletter and digital campaigns. So she do a lot of things for us, and I would like to welcome Elizabeth and Sushi. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Monica, for the wonderful introduction. I hope you all can hear me well. And let's move on to the next slide. Hopefully it works. Okay. So on today's agenda, we're going to talk about a simple conversion strategy. How do we extract key messages from findings and then convert them into assets that are digestible, accessible, and useful for your audience? We're going to do this by looking at three examples. One is an infographic we created for trends and disparities in concussion among youth in BC, and how we invited youth to give us feedback on that infographic. And then our second example is an infographic for parents that talks about sexual health in East Asians. And we're going to talk about how this can be a sensitive topic for a lot of groups, and what we use as strategies to make sure that it's digestible. We don't use any shameful language, and we make it as accessible as possible. And our third example is the SOGI 123 report, where I'll invite Elizabeth to talk about the press release and some of the media attention we got. And then we'll end this with a simple checklist that you can reuse for your own project. So the method. The method we use at SARAVYC is something that I think you can use throughout different organizations and data that you're handling. So let's say that one of your coworkers sends you a 200-page report, and they say, I need an infographic this week. And then they tell you who the audience is. But now you have to sort through the 200 pages of report. What do you do first? So first, you should start with looking at the reports tables and then going back to them and saying, can you send me a summary of this report and the key findings? In my case, for example, I received a 2-page summary, and I say, okay, I see all of this text and now I need to convert this into an infographic. I ask, who is the audience for this infographic? Let's say it's youth. So then I say, okay, where do youth spend most of their time? Is it Instagram? Is it in schools? Are they looking at pin boards? Are they looking at LinkedIn? And then I think about how to make those 3 or 4 messages that I took from this report in as accessible format as possible, in plain language that's defensible and that's specific. And then I know I said infographic, but different data would call for different formats. So let's say that I want to create a one pager or a toolkit from the data I have. So pick the format that resonates with your audience the most. And then the last step is to test and iterate. Make sure that the tone is right, the placement is right. You'll be creating a number of drafts. And in my case, go back to my team and say, is this what you were hoping to get out of me? And then I think this will all make more sense when I start showing you the example. So, like I said before, one of the infographics that we made was for trends and disparities in concussions among youth in BC. What I received was a 7-page findings report and summary. And so, my next step was to go back to my team and say, can you condense this information as much as possible? So, they sent me back a 1-page report. And then I said, who is the audience for this report? We identified two audiences, youth and policymakers. And then I said, let's think about the three or four big messages that we want our youth to take away. What is it that you want them to remember 10 minutes after they have seen that infographic? And then we designed the draft infographic. And the last step was to test it with migrant youth, which I think was the best step. And I'll show you why. Um, okay, so the key messages we prioritized from the data set was accidental injuries are common among youth. 15% reported a concussion in the past year. For boys and girls, organized sports were the leading mechanism of concussion. And then we looked at migrant youth versus Canadian born youth and how that changed these numbers. So here on the bottom of this infographic, you're going to see that I created these cubes to show what the numbers look like. For example, I wanted to say that migrant youth are twice as likely as Canadian born girls to get an injury at work. And then I made sure that there's a lot of white space here. I made sure that there's a lot of pop of color because that's what you'd like. And then I made sure that the colors are contrasting. So you'll see the blue and the orange, and then obviously our CeraVYC colors. And we took this infographic and went back to our youth advisory and we asked them what they thought of it. So I was really married to the idea of doing these blocks to represent the data, but the feedback we got, and this is the second graph, that's why I kept it. The feedback that we got was take out the cubes and just show us the percentages, bold the key points so our eyes land quickly on it, and consider highlighting a message that we skipped, which was many injuries go unreported. So it shifts the meaning of our infographic a little bit. Then we asked them, what's the best placement for this infographic? And surprisingly, they said physical spaces before they said digital spaces. So they said schools, rec centers, clinics, and libraries. And it makes sense because when you're consuming content on a digital screen, you're very likely to scroll past it very quickly. But when you see it in a physical space and you see something stand out, you might give it more time than you would on a digital platform. And then we asked them, if we do end up putting these on digital platforms, what platforms would work best? And as expected, they said Instagram and TikTok. And instead of sharing their entire infographic, why don't you do at a glance 1, 2 fast facts and then link it back to the infographic that you can host on your website? Um, so our placement plan is not just posting this infographic, but we can have these at schools, at community centers, at rec centers, and then we can do shorter snippets of the big infographic, and then do one key takeaway, two key takeaways, and link it back to the website. So we have a link and a QR whenever we do it for a full big picture breakdown for those who want more detail. For a second example, we have a parent-facing infographic. So our team actually divided this for different demographic groups. This one here is for East Asian migrant youth. We did one for South Asian migrant youth as well, and other migrant groups. And then we divided this in a format where we're comparing girls and boys, and then one format that just shows non-binary youth. And if you look at this infographic, we use plain language here and neutral framing. We highlighted safety and relationships. And we kept statistics tight and non-alarmist. We avoided any shameful language, and we set more context that reduces panic. For example, you'll see that we said most youth are not sexually active here. This is something parents would like to hear. And we made it conversation ready. So we said what matters, why it matters, and then we said, what can you do next? In this situation, we said, so, parent child conversations matter. So, this is the safety reason why we should be talking about sexual health and relationship safety. Again, we designed the asset to be culturally digestible and safer to engage with. We anchored on safety, well being, communication. We used more of risk and protection language instead of any fear based messaging. And we made it easy to read. So we had big headings, short bullets. We actually highlighted the numbers as was suggested in one of our youth advisory groups, and we kept the statistics very clear. Now, what we plan to do with this is take this back to one of our advisory groups made of parents and then ask, what do you think this is saying? Does anything feel shameful, scary, or unclear? So do a little bit of a tone check and then ask them, where would you expect to see this? Or what would be the best way to disseminate this? And then adapt this format for print, for Instagram, or other digital spaces they recommend. Now we're going to move to our third example, which is the SOGI 123 report. And I'm going to ask Elizabeth, I'm going to invite her to come in and talk about the press release launch and what happened after and how it got picked up, any interviews, radio, and if there was any unexpected amplification.
Thanks, Sushi. As many people know, SOGI 123 is a resource for schools in BC and Alberta and other parts of Canada that provides supportive guidance and policies and content for teachers around creating safe and inclusive schools for people around sexual orientation and gender identity and intersection of identities. We conducted an evaluation that included 10 years of data, both before and after SOGI 123 was implemented. And this was a 2-year evaluation. The timing of releasing the report from it ended up bumping up against the election that was happening, the provincial election that was happening in BC. We had already planned to have the report released. As I said, it was a 2-year evaluation, but they dropped the writ just as we were ready to launch the report. And it was an interesting time because there was actually a number of candidates who were speaking specifically from an anti-SOGI perspective and were claiming that if they became elected, they would be eliminating the program and go to something more generic, or because it didn't actually reduce other kinds of discrimination, etc. And so a lot of the rhetoric that was in the general discussion was sort of evidence free, if you will. A lot of assertions, but not any evidence to back it up. So this was a really good time to then release the report. So in addition to releasing the report, we actually worked with BC Public Affairs to create a press release and to pitch the story to some key media in advance of the release of the press release so that they got sort of a sneak peek. And as a result, we ended up with interviews in from some media. And that ended up with, being on like global news and various other places. Now, some folks actually, called for interview. And I did those interviews, whether by Zoom or on radio or in person. Others actually created their news story from the press release itself and just sort of summarized it, maybe reached out and interviewed other people to add quotes above and beyond the press release that we had created. Um, this was a timely moment, so there was definitely a lot of interest. Um, one of the I did a number of different radio interviews, usually kind of brief ones, but one that was unexpected and exciting to me was the Punjabi radio station's morning drive radio show actually invited me to come on the show, and they gave usually, a news story is going to be like 30 seconds to a minute. If you're really lucky, you're going to get 4 or 5 minutes before something's done. They actually gave us 20 minutes, and the um, the host kind of walked through all the details of the report, one thing after another, and asked questions about it in a very thoughtful and careful way that allowed me to explain things very clearly and in more detail than might be covered in a brief, 1 minute. So that was really unexpected and exciting, especially since at the time there had been some really active um, anti-SOGI rhetoric by certain candidates in the South Asian community in the regions where this radio station was a popular one. So that felt like a really great opportunity to reach an audience that we didn't often reach. There was a lot of news coverage, and that was really exciting. And then, as we were sort of monitoring what was happening, to my surprise, there was a TikTok video. And it wasn't anyone I knew. It wasn't anyone connected to SARAVYC in any way or connected to SOGI 123. It was actually a sort of random citizen who tends to do these TikTok videos about key content and research. And basically, he created a video that walked through our report, had like little screenshots of the results from the report itself, along with him talking and interpreting it to a totally different audience. It was really surprising and really cool. Um, as with any hot button issue that's going to be argued during elections or in the public media, of course, in addition to the news articles that took place and the unexpected TikTok video and interviews, there was some social media pushback from anti-LGBTQ or anti-SOGI groups. Just some comments that were made. Some of them looked like they really didn't read the report. Some did, but misunderstood. In a report, for example, we say where um, it's funded, and of course, the Canadian Institutes of Health Research funded the evaluation, and so someone actually called out and said, "Oh, well, it was the minister so and so who funded it. It's partisan." And it's like, no, actually, the minister doesn't review CIHR grants. So that was, and in fact, when the grant was funded, this person wasn't even the minister. So, so those kinds of things do happen. But generally, the news coverage was both accurate and um, positive and informed and gave us sort of wide coverage. Handing it back to you, Sushi, to talk about the other things that were part of the campaign for this dissemination.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I think one of the reasons that most of the news was accurate or at least was linking back to a report is because we had a place, an anchor where we had the report, which was our website, which was our homepage. And we linked everything we did on social media, on our newsletter, and deeper engagement back to that web page. So we created a home base, which was the website where the public can find the full report and the key points. And then we made sure that our social content wasn't oversimplifying anything, but gave our audience an entry point. For example, one of our first Instagram posts was, "What is SOGI 123?" Let's not assume that everybody knows everything about what's happening. And then it was one of the quotes from a teacher or a SOGI lead that we worked with. And then it was, what was our methodology? And so we broke it down into very simple simple ways that our audience could actually digest it. And then every single time we posted something, our call to action was the bigger report. But obviously, that wasn't enough. And then we wanted to do more deeper engagement. So, one of the ways we did that was through the newsletter, which gives us an opportunity to write more, to explain more, and to give more context. So, for our quarterly newsletter, we made SOGI 123 report our main highlight. And again, we linked it back to our anchor, to our homepage. And then we did a lunch and learn, just like this one, where we invited folks to ask questions about our report. We shared our methodology, we shared what we found, and then we did a little bit of a longer Q&A there. And then again, our single source of truth, which is the resource page. So our big takeaway is that the home base kept everything anchored, so people weren't relying on screenshots or third-hand takes. And then, like Elizabeth mentioned, there was that extra layer of the TikTok spin-off, and they were referencing the report, which was great. So now that we have seen the three examples, I want to quickly recap the one-page checklist that I promised we would have, which we can use to convert any project into assets. So when you make your infographic or your social media post or a one-pager or a toolkit, newsletter, anything, I want you to first think of who the primary audience is, just one sentence. Then identify the three messages that we can write in plain language. And the format should match the audience and should match where the audience actually spends their time. For example, if it's policymakers, if your organization is on Twitter or X, that's where they spend their time, or press release. But if it's youth, then it would not be X or a press release. It would be Instagram or TikTok or even LinkedIn. And then check the tone, the accessibility and equity considerations. One thing that we are mindful of, and I'm mindful of when designing, is to make sure that there's enough contrast between colors. So anybody with a visual impairment can also view it digitally. I make sure to alt tag all of our pictures. And there are many websites that do this for you, that run these checks for you. But Canva, if you're using that, has a built-in accessibility measure, so you can use that. And then the next step is the next action should be explicit. What do you want them to do after they've seen or engaged with this public asset that you've created? Do you want them to sign up for something? Do you want them to look back at the longer report that you have on your website? Do you want them to comment, sign a petition? And then the one proof point should be included, and included well in what you're showing. That one evidence is a number, a quote, or a concrete example. And then link it all back to your single source of truth, which in our case is hosting it on the website. And then we were lucky, but I know that this is something not everybody has an opportunity to do, but we would encourage you to do, is go back to your audience and ask for feedback. So in our case, that was the youth advisory group. We were able to go back to them and ask them what their big takeaway was. And we're going to do the same thing with our parent focus groups. And then, yes, I have a little recap, and I'm going to send this to everybody who attended the session. But this is just, again going on about audience, key message, claims, format, clarity, and then obviously your placement plan and where will it live. It's not just about sharing it, it's about making sure that it's accessible to all and in a clear format. So that's about it. Thank you so much. And I would love to take any questions you have for me, for Elizabeth, for anybody, any comments, any suggestions.
I can read if there is anything. There are no questions in the chat.
I guess that could be a good sign too. Maybe the presentation was just very clear.
Yes.
Yeah, Chris says very clear and usable talk. Thank you. And Shams as well. Awesome talk. Elizabeth and Sushi, thank you for sharing your expertise. Yeah, great presentation. Thank you. These
Thank
are the
you.
comments in the chat box.
Shams, did you want to say something? I saw
Yeah,
your. Okay.
I know we are running out of time, so thank you both. It's an amazing talk. Sushi, great presentation. Thank you so much. Um, and I hope it's a very brief question. So I was wondering, and this question for you and Elizabeth, have you ever faced um like a situation where actually you created the info or the infograph and then you presented the infograph or it was public, but then I don't know, you received a form of I don't know if I can call it like a rejection or not approval, and then you needed to tweak it or change it in a smart way to be, let's say, less triggering for some groups of people in the society. I don't know, since our society is very, very diverse. And I am one of those who supports sharing the knowledge dissemination, to create a change and for social justice. But at the same time, I have learned that sometimes we have to play it smart. I don't know if you or Elizabeth may comment on my question. I'm so sorry if it's a complex question.
No,
Yeah.
no, yeah, sure. Uh, um, we've had we've occasionally had pushback about the materials at times and questions. Um, but usually those are people that aren't going to be persuaded. I mean, it's like they're very specifically using it as taking a political message. We've had opportunities, at times where people have responded with feedback that makes it clear that, we didn't quite, it's still a little complex. It's still not clear. We need to come up with another way to explain, especially if it's like complex statistical modeling kinds of approaches. They don't generally render themselves easy to infographics. Um, so sometimes we get that kind of feedback, and then we go back and try to figure out ways to be a little more creative, or another approach, or we take on another opportunity, like adding a chance to do little animated videos or something else. But yeah, I think we've been pretty lucky in that we haven't had a lot of uh, that kind of feedback that we would need to change. Now, we have had the occasional moment when we realized that there's actually like typos, or there was we picked, when it came time to do the infographic, there was an inaccuracy in numbers, and then we have to fix it. And then we like take it down, put in a new one, make sure we've got the right numbers. But that's different.
Chris, do you want to go ahead? You have raised your hand.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you've done a really good job of talking about how you go from talking points to the audience. Um, as a member of the academic cohort, we're not always that great at being specific and concise and knowing what's important about the work we've done. And I wonder if there's another piece of that communication that, CIHR would call knowledge translation, where you try to actually get academics with information to do a better job of feeding that to the communications people. And I
Yeah.
don't think that's an easy thing, but
That is not an easy thing. And in fact, so that is kind of like step one. How do you get from the academic information and our geeking out on our research to key messages? How do you identify what those key messages are? Um, And that is tricky because, of course, most of us are really passionate about our research and all the nitty-gritty details of it in ways that would generally send the general public with their eyes glazing over. So part of it is actually a back and forth, and this is where Sushi is really excellent as someone with a background in communications. It's that dialogue of, okay, we think this is what's the key messages, and Sushi's going to be like, what? No. Can we like say that again? And I often try okay, how would you explain this research to your grandmother who has no idea what it is you do, or to your teenage um, sibling who couldn't care less? Can you put it in ways that are short and clear and simple without making it not accurate? Because sometimes what happens if you're waiting, if you're looking for comms folks to come up with the key message, they sometimes create a message that is no longer scientifically accurate. So
Yeah.
part of it is that back and forth between how do you make sure that the message is clear and interesting and speaks to people. And then the other thing is actually the connecting with, as Sushi said, the audience, the young people or the parents or the public policymakers about the messaging, and listening to them as we're sharing, and what do they say is really important, and then making sure that that's a key part of the message. So yeah, there is some dialogue there. It's also important for us to remember that most of the world doesn't get nearly as excited about measurement and statistics and qualitative data analysis and theory as we do. Surprising, but true.
I also want to say, I think Elizabeth said it right, but most of the complicated statistical analysis or any other quantitative work, I don't get it. So I have to ask questions to understand it myself, to be able to translate it for somebody else. So it helps to be outside of you know, I guess uh, academia and health and healthcare and everything, because I don't really get it. So I have to keep asking questions. And I consider myself at a ninth grade math level. So I get very scared when I look at big numbers. So it has to make sense to me to be able to make sense to our audience as well.
Okay, I think um, there are no further questions. So thank you, Sushi. Thank you, Elizabeth, for this wonderful webinar. Really great learning experience for me, and I'm sure for all our attendees. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We'll see you next month. Our webinars are usually third Thursdays of every month. Only January we got a week late, but from next month it would be every third Thursdays. And yeah, watch out, keep an eye on our email with further information. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. See you.
Thank you.